Most of us spend 80 to 90% of our time indoors in effectively closed boxes, yet our homes could potentially be a healing environment. So today, I want to ask house healer Tim Walter about how your home heals. Health Explorer Neil Fellows here, and if you want to get healthy and fit and stay healthy and fit and do it in a way that's unique and natural to you, then please subscribe and hit the bell to get notified of all of our latest interviews and health review. Have you ever thought of your home as a healing environment? It was a new idea to me when I first heard about it, and today I want to explore it more with house healer and alternative life coach Tim Walter. Tim, why should we be thinking about our home as a healing environment?
It's a lovely question, isn't it, actually? I've come to learn and to realize just actually how important the home is as a healing environment. We might have discussed this before. I'm a card-carrying introvert, so I actually find home life very, very important as part of my overall sort of balance of well-being. But I've recently started a new channel on YouTube, and it's actually called Your Home Heals. And the reason I've started this is partly, this is going to take a little while to explain this one, Neil. So just
I'll bear with you.
So the reason I've started it is partly as a platform for all of the house healers, the professional house healers that I've trained, so that people coming to the channel can see the individuals and the way that they interact with the home environment and what they do in their own particular specialization to help improve the environment of people's homes to improve the well-being of the individual client. Okay, so that's the purpose of Your Home Heals. Your question was, how does the home kind of function as a healing environment, isn't it? That's really what you're asking. And the point is that there's so much influence that we take from what we perceive to be our external environment, so much influence that we take on board that affects us on a subconscious level and ultimately affects how we feel. So this is all about our subjective experience of reality. And within that subjective experience, that feeling of who am I, how do I feel, what am I thinking, literally, if you've got somebody that is deeply depressed, for example, that is a very different experience of a reality than somebody who is used to being very much on the up, has got loads of physical energy and mental energy, and is really pushing things forward and making things happen. Those are two completely diverse ends of the spectrum. But each of those people are experiencing their own absolutely unique experience of reality, and that is their subjective reality. Their environment in which they live not only affects the way they feel, their subjective awareness, but it also actually would appear, if we look at some of the science that is going on at the moment with neuroscience and in quantum theory, that actually the environment in which the person lives is projected, is literally part of them, part of the way that they create the world in which they live. And that's absolutely fascinating. So part of that aspect, when we get into what science calls the subtle energies, that's where we are working as house healers. That's where we are putting our good intent, if you like. If you want to use the word healing, then it's a healing, but it's a process that we develop, and we work on these subtle energies of people's environment in order to assist the individual. And it's something that you can do at a more basic level for yourself, and I'm sure we'll discuss that. But it's just a fascinating area of work, actually, to be honest.
Yeah. So what are some of the ways that we can bring that feeling of healing into our homes?
Well, the classic ways, you go from one end of the scale, which is the very physical and obvious thing. So like, people talk about comfort and, removing clutter, just being generally tidy, things like security and, having ample light, all of these sort of things. These are very much on the physical layer. But again, if we talk about subtle energy, then that is about being aware of how you feel, being mindful of how you feel, and adjusting using focused intent. Basically, those are the key words. Focused intention to actually adjust and work on the external environment, but that also then reflects back onto the internal environment. I mean, people use things like plants, and there's the fascinating area of design, interior design, called biophilic design. And I'm going to be talking to somebody about biophilic design fairly soon on my channels. But that is about connecting with nature and how nature has an effect on the subjective aspect of the individual, and very often that's a subconscious aspect, right? So that's really interesting, but that's something that science recognizes. They recognize that there are specific physiological changes, and these affect the mental well-being of the person. So even just having, we've talked about this before, even just having plants in an office or plants in a room really does make a difference to somebody's well-being. But there is more than that, because for me, going back to that sort of quantum theory and looking at consciousness, if you like, of what is our reality, then actually there is something very, very fundamental that we have lost touch with about being connected with nature, because we are a part of nature. And what we generally do as a society these days is to say, no, we're separate from that. Look at all of that wildlife. Look at all of that, that forest that needs saving. Look, isn't it terrible that it's being demolished? Well, actually, that's a part of us. It's a part of the human psyche, in the sense of the subtle energies that actually exist as a whole overall. I know it gets a bit deep when I start to talk like this, but that's the link between, literally an individual's home, and really when you start to extrapolate the thinking, it actually affects the environment in which we see ourselves. So it's very, very important to be aware of your own subtle influences, both mental and more especially the ones that are connected with the heart and the way that you feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking as you're talking there about something that we've just done. As I walk into this room, I've got a nice big window just off to the side here. And we've just actually made some changes in the front garden. So as I walk into this room, I look through this window and I immediately connect with nature. I'm fortunate in that I've got a lovely hillside, just above my neighbour's house that I can look at too. But there's just something in terms of like what catches your eye as you come into a room, and then there's an immediate feeling with being in that place. And I think that if you can look out and see something that's nature, that's pretty, that's green, or got flowers on it, you have a different connection to that to if you just looked out at a fence or a brick wall. So completely get that. And also when you were talking there as well, I think I was at a friend's house. He just moved house and just in their new place last weekend. And they've got some lovely doors in this house, like proper doors, thick, big stuff. And we're talking about a sense of security and feeling safe in your home environment, in terms of like, surely like security is like at that base level of healing. And if you don't feel secure, can you sleep properly? Can you rest? Do you feel at home and at one?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the security of a house, though, is not only about that sort of physical object. I mean, you feel secure when you've got big, heavy doors, because of the very nature of what you perceive to be the threat outside. I mean, obviously, that's all to do with the instinctive reaction of building, living in one's cave and being protected from those predatory animals of years ago. It'll be sitting there in the ancient part of the brain. But it's not. The key thing about that is that anxiety, is the feeling of anxiety that might be present if one didn't have the big heavy door in place. I remember as a young man living in London, I looked at renting a house on the Mile End Road in the East End. Now, if you know anything about the Mile End Road, you know that it's like one of the main thoroughfares coming out of London, and the East End at that time used to be very rough, to say the least. And I looked at this flat, and the flat itself was gorgeous. It was above shops. But the front door of that flat had so many massive bolts on it and chains on it to stop anybody coming through that door. And I just thought, yeah, this isn't the place for me. But it was massive. I mean, it really was creating a feeling of security for those people living inside. But it wasn't going to be for me, because that meant that, well, whatever happens on the other side of that door is, for me at the time, far too scary. So the point is that there are many ways that actually the feeling of anxiety can be addressed by changing your environment. And sometimes what's necessary is that you get somebody else in that can do that on a very significant, the mental level. It's a very subtle level, but significant level, to actually help those feelings of anxiety that are expressed day to day to be reduced. And it's not necessarily about what you immediately see. I mean, I do get a fair amount of clients who do actually suffer with those sort of nervous anxiety phases. I mean, you can call them anxiety attacks if you like sometimes. What we do is actually by affecting the subtle energy in which they live, it helps reduce the anxiety that they experience day to day. So then what happens is that there's that wonderful kind of interconnection between, they feel less anxious, and therefore the whole anxiety levels drop. So as long as that initial feeling of, oh, something's changed in here, this feels much better, as they walk into their house or as they lie in bed at night and they haven't got that habitual anxiety creeping up on them, then things are really, things can really change.
If we thought about home as a healing environment, we made some changes, what might we start to notice going on for us?
Well, whether or not this applies specifically to the home, actually, I had an email this morning, right? And I put literally what the guy said this morning. This was a fellow that I was talking to the other day, helping him through some stuff. He was feeling not anxiety in his life, but he was feeling a lot of anger. And I did some work on him. And this morning I got an email through and he said, I don't know what you did or if it's simply my imagination, but I feel like a huge weight has been taken off me this last couple of days. That is a typical sort of reaction from a client that's had the subtle energy work. They talk about an improved lightness. They talk about things like, I haven't felt like this for years, or I had forgotten that I used to laugh so much. This sort of feeling. And this is what we see when we are working on something that is subtle, but it is significant. And it's those responses that we're looking for to prove that something has changed, something has shifted. Now, the key to it, not the key, but the key thing about a sentence like that from this guy, for example, is that actually, I don't know what it is if you did, or is it simply my imagination? So that suggests that, like, okay, something's going on here. It's not because, I had a call from my daughter that I haven't spoken to for 20 years or something like that. So there's not something that they can put their finger on. And that's, what I would say would be one of the indicators that there's probably a cause and effect somewhere between what we've done as the house healer and what the person is experiencing. There's quite a lot of sort of examples of that in the work that I do. And that's really what we're looking for. What we're working with is a sort of if you like, a field of influence that is constantly out there.
Yeah.
That has been sort of talked about and used and witnessed, if you like, in religious belief for eons. Religion is like we're programmed to be kind of think of something being present that is greater than ourselves. And so that feeling that there's something else there that can be called upon is really what we call upon it. So in a way, what we do, you could almost classify it as prayer. But the power of prayer, well, I don't know. I prefer not to use that word because it's incredibly emotionally charged in itself, as are a lot of these labels. But we do something changes for the client, and yeah, there is a percentage of that is based in the real practical, just sharing a problem with a person, that always has an effect. It may be an aspect of, well, somebody is helping me now at this point, and so therefore their energy changes anyway. We don't know, but certainly the great thing is that when we do something, we act on something happens. and the client feels it. And that's what we're looking for, is change.
So Tim, let's do something a little different to what we've often talked about, because often we're very practical. Let's just for a moment, for the people that are open-minded, just explore this just a little bit deeper, and let's look at that sort of subtle energy, spirituality angle of things. What would be the first kind of thing that you would do as a house healer for somebody that they might sort of notice in a subtle way?
The way that we work is that the way that I break the work down, so to make it accessible for people when they come to me, is to have like a menu of choice about services that they want to achieve, things that they want to achieve. So things that we can do for them. So typically, actually, there is an example. Did I put one down here? Yeah, so this is an example, and this is a great example. Actually, it answers your question. We'll just go through it. So this lady approached me. She said in an email, "I'd like to have my home checked for any geopathic stress," because that's what we call these detrimental influences. It generally is geopathic stress. It's a pretty old home. Many other families have lived here before us. Sometimes I just feel that the energy of the previous home occupiers are still very much attached to the house. My daughter and myself do not have very good sleep. I'm not sure if it's just because we are more the anxious type or any other reason that can be resolved by house healing. So in that instance, and that's quite typical of what people come to me with, I suggested that we did what I call a mini report. Right. So what I do is I literally ask them for the floor plan. I get a floor plan of their house. They can be anywhere in the world. I dowse. So that's really using intuitive information that comes to you when you connect to a space. And again, this is something that is fairly well established as being a practical ability. So there's aspects of science. There was work by Dean Radin and this sort of research that actually does demonstrate that there is some kind of connection that's possible. You probably based on what they call entanglement. But anyway, so we can access the space and get some information. And what we then do is when we've got that information that falls into various different categories, we then sit in a meditative state to do the healing part of the process, which is to simply ask upstairs, to ask what we call the management. Some people might call it God. I tend not to call it God. Some people might call it the universe. But we ask the management in various forms to do the work, because all we're doing as individuals is to sit and be observers in the process. That is the energy that we're addressing and asking for change to occur for this other individual. And that's it's as simple as that, and yet it takes a considerable amount of time sometimes. So what we look for is things like underground water. We look for sort of EMF that can be detrimental. We look for things like toxic lines. There are all sorts of different categorizations of subjects that we look for that are usually giving subtle or not so subtle influences on a person. Something like EMF, for example, obviously you can register with a meter. But if I'm working with somebody that's in Australia, then clearly I'm not going to have that information.
Yeah. So we talked about geopathic stress detection in a previous video, which some of the things you alluded to there. So I'll make sure we add a link below so that people can go and watch that and get more of an idea of the process that you go through. Tim, always like to leave people with a challenge if they want to take it. How would what would be a first step that we could do, having heard you talk about this today?
Yeah, well, I mean, it relies on you having, got the hang of your dowsing, because you're not going to do this challenge, Neil. You need to be able to douse. So that's use a dowsing rod. So what I literally would like you to do is to go into each room in your home and ask the question. So ask that dowsing mode, how beneficial is this room for me, so in other words, for you, on a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the most positive and beneficial. Okay, so you'd go into your living room, you'd have your rods there, and you'd say, right, I'd like to ask, how beneficial is this room for me on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most positive. And then you would count and say, so as you count 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to move at some point, and they'll give you a yes response. Okay, so you're getting a guide as to, well, okay, so if you might then want to ask, well, what can I do? What can I do, you do in this room to improve it so that it gets, gets a better reading, gets closer to 10. If there is anything, just ask the questions about it and ask and see what you can get. But the main thing is, the real challenge is just to go into each room and ask those questions, get a kind of a reading, a gauge on how positive and life enhancing and beneficial is that space for you. And then you can also add in, you could say, well, how positive, beneficial is it for my wife or for my children? Those sort of things, right? Or for you as a family. All these different questions that you can ask. But fundamentally, I want you just to go away and kind of build a gauge about which aspects of the house are the most positive and beneficial for you. And you might actually find, if you do it outside in the garden, that the garden is the best possible place.
Nice one. Tim, thank you. Always appreciate your time. Each week, I ask our experts to leave us with a challenge. It's just an idea. It's something that we could try. If you like it, stick with it. If it doesn't work for you, just throw the idea out and keep searching for something else that does work for you and helps you moving forward. I'll be taking this challenge. You can see my findings from this challenge in our challenge roundup video, which is a monthly summary covering all of the challenges our experts have shared. To get that video and all of our latest health and wellness uploads, including interviews and reviews, subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified whenever we post. And if this channel can help your friends and family, please share it with them too. If you want to get proactive with your health, Total Wellness Club are developing health quests over at questly.life. Join while we're developing the site and get access to health quests that immediately personalise your health. You'll get to identify which of 10 critical health categories need your attention. You'll be able to track your progress and you'll be able to help us develop the platform too. I'll put a link in the description and I'll see you in the next video.